Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I hope this video finds you well wherever you are in the world. So please let me, if you don't mind, continue with my conversation with respect to a particular film that was directed by John Carpenter. Because after all, it's all in the reflexes. So in my last video about Big Trouble in Little China, I spoke about this particular release from Scream Factory. So now what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is I'd like to go into a little bit of detail with respect to this film and why I really cherish it the way that I do. And to do that, I will be talking about this film with some detail and talking about the actual plot and what happens at the end, for example. So if you have not yet seen this film, Big Trouble in Little China, I would strongly suggest that you turn off this video and watch this film if you are able to. And then after that, you can always come back and watch this video, because I will be talking about this in terms of spoilers and details of the plot. So again, you can always come back at any time, and at which time I would always love to hear your thoughts about this film, Big Trouble in Little China. Okay, my friends, so you're back, which means you don't mind me talking in detail about this film, Big Trouble in Little China, so I can assume that you have seen this film. So, where to begin with this? I suppose I can begin at the beginning, which is that I can't remember a time where I didn't know this film. In other words, this film was released in the 80s, and it was I was a kid at the time, a very impressionable age. And when this film was released, and then subsequently on video, this was where I first became aware of this film, and I first began to see the film. And there are many things about it that I didn't understand. There are many jokes perhaps that I didn't get at the time, but the overall feel that I got as a kid was wonder and delight and awe. I was in awe of these characters as I saw them just do their thing on the screen, and I was in awe of Jack Burton, and I loved Jack Burton, and I loved Wang, and I loved Gracie Law, and I loved Shen, and I just loved that whole storyline and the arc, and I just was marveling at the whole setup of this world with Lo Pan and the three storms, thunder, rain, and lightning, and everything that it was transpiring, and the whole fights with the Wing Kong and the Chang Sing, and all the monsters and creatures, and the mystery and the supernatural, and all of that stuff, and the martial arts fights and all this stuff. This was all such a thrill to watch when you're 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old. And ever since then, it's just been a continuous relationship with this film. And I've seen this film countless times, more times than I could even begin to try to even remember. And so, yes, this is a film where I can't remember a time where I didn't know this film. So it's always been like an old friend to me. It's always been like a film that has given me solace and comfort. And it always has put a smile on my face. And it's been a film that I truly love and cherish. And I think I will continue to do so for many, many years to come. So this is, for me, the feelings that I have about Big Trouble in Little China. Now, that might affect the way that I view this film in terms of a maybe, I don't know, critical analysis of the film, if you will. And perhaps that's true, but these impressions, subjective impressions, I think are very valid. If you have an impression about a film, that's a very valid thing. And so, and of course, this film has its fans. It has a lot of fans. It also has its detractors, and I can understand and appreciate that. But still, regardless of where one might fall in that spectrum, I think it is without a doubt a film that it is so obvious from the screen and everything that is here that it's very clear that the filmmakers and all the participants in the film, they are trying to entertain. They're putting everything on the screen in order to entertain and to delight us and to thrill us. And so I think on that score alone, I think this film succeeds quite marvelously. And then, of course, there's the film itself, which I really cherish, and I really I truly I find to be one of those special films for me. And I think also it's very curious, well, not curious, but I think it's a very significant milestone film in the context of John Carpenter's career, at least the way that I see it and understand it to be. And I think it's that way for a number of reasons. And this is, of course, based on the information that I've managed to pick up about this film through DVD and Blu-ray supplements, including the Blu-ray that I have here in front of me. But if I were to put it in general terms, I would say that for one, it's the last time, of course, that we will have the partnership between John Carpenter and Dean Cundey, the director of photography that he worked a lot with on his previous films. And then here it will be their last collaboration. And it is such Dean Cundey is one of those key components in the Carpenter world, so to speak. The Carpenter look and feel and the photography, of course, will continue on in very dynamic and amazing ways in the film subsequent to this, of course. But one must acknowledge the key role of Dean Cundey in shaping and forming and creating the look of the John Carpenter cinema experience. And so to have Carpenter and Cundey here for one last time, I think that is very significant in the context of this film. And in the film, of course, we see so many wonderful camera movements and compositions that are very varied and also very indicative of the kind of skill and craftsmanship that Cundey brought to the table. Sometimes the camera would be very static, but it would capture so much detail and life and be almost majestic in terms of capturing a sense of tension or awe or scope or epic scale. And then also there would be times when the camera would be just flowing like a ghost or like an ethereal being through this world that is slowly being developed and created and painted before our very eyes. And yet there would be also moments of sheer thrill and splendor and extravagance and wild, sheer joy and abandon. And this is all captured in the camera work that we see with Cundey. So it's wonderful to see this pairing one last time. And it's wonderful to see it in full force, as it always has been in Carpenter's work up to now. I think this film is also significant in Carpenter's filmography because it does bring together a lot of elements that indicate a real love of cinema. And we've seen this in Carpenter's work before about how Carpenter's trying to, or he seems to be taking different genres and putting them in a sense like homage or trying to use them and turn them on their heads and create fresh takes on them, and turn them to his advantage for purposes of developing the plot and style. And so we've seen this in many aspects of his films up to here. But here in Big Trouble in Little China, what's amazing is that he's taking many different genres of cinema and blending them together in one uniquely fine-tuned, crafted work of cinema. So we have the martial arts genre, we have sort of ghost story genre, we have Western, we have a sort of fish out of water story, we have a little bit of a romance, we have a buddy film, buddy action adventure film, and the like. And I mean, for example, if we think about the Western, I mean, this isn't a full-fledged Western in the sense that it's not taking place in the Wild West, or it's not taking place in sort of older times, but it's taking place in quote-unquote modern-day San Francisco. And so these aren't cowboys in that sense of the word, but it is very, I think it's a possible way of looking at the film to say that the scenes that are being set up with Jack Burton and Wang and Lo Pan and the fighting and all this action and an intrigue, it has a feel of a Western in a sense. I mean, take for example that the first sequence when Jack and Wang are at the table there, and after their night of gambling, and Wang is trying to win back the money with one last bet, with betting that he could slice the bottle in half with the knife. And so just as he's about to do it, both of them are sitting at either ends of the table, and the camera switches to this wide shot, and it's framed almost like a Western duel in a sense. It's really quite remarkable, and that sense of a standoff between two sides, and we saw that with the Wing Kong and the Chang Sing, and we see that also in the final battle at the wedding of Lo Pan. Between both sides, good and bad, and we see these sort of standoffs occur between these two fighting forces on either side, and that has a wonderful Western feel to it, almost like a Leone film. And then of course we have the martial arts element of the film, borrowing heavily from this tradition, all the way down to having the good guys wearing yellow and the bad guys wearing red, and with the Chang Sing and the Wing Kong, and then we have the supernatural element brought in with the Lo Pan and the Three Storms and the creatures and all that, and so on and so forth. And so and also there is also an element of old Hollywood Howard Hawks style entertainment. In films like Bringing Up Baby or His Girl Friday, in His Girl Friday in particular, there's a very quick way in which dialogue, snappy, witty dialogue, is being delivered, and there is a very similar pattern of dialogue delivery with Kim Cattrall as Gracie Law, and also Dennis Dunn as Wang. So Gracie and Wang, the way that they talk is quite rapid fire, and so this is very reminiscent of this sort of Howard Hawks style of dialogue delivery, line delivery. And so this is yet another hearkening back to these cinema traditions that John Carpenter was so familiar with, because he is so steeped in cinema knowledge, and everything is brought to the fore here, many elements, and then brought together in a wonderful, wild, and amazing cocktail of a film. So this, I think, is very important, because this is a further exploration or expression of this cinema language that John Carpenter is so versed in. And within this tapestry, or emerging from this world, of course, we have what is some of the great characters that have emerged in a John Carpenter film. And when you talk about the characters, of course, one must discuss the one and only Jack Burton. Who? Jack Burton, me, right? That's what he says. And I wish I had a little bit of lipstick on my mouth there to drive the point even further, of course, because Jack Burton is a one-of-a-kind icon of characters of cinema, one of the greatest characters in a John Carpenter film, and I would actually argue that he is one of those great movie characters from 80s American cinema. And the reason is because he is so likable and lovable, and Kurt Russell gives him such a dynamic, lovable charm that is both quite ignorant of the actual danger and peril that the character actually finds himself in during many points in the film. And yet at the same time, there's a combination of just luck and sort of this sweet-natured ignorance, and perhaps a little bit well, actually, I was going to say ignorance, but I did say ignorance, but in actual fact, I think it's more complicated than that, or more complex than that, because much has been said about Jack Burton, about how he is meant to be the hero of the film, but in fact it's Wang who is the actual hero. So the roles seem to be reversed in what is ordinarily expected in a sort of Hollywood film like this. And that is true. Jack Burton is in many ways the sort of sidekick character to the hero that is Wang, the Dennis Dunn character. And so that might suggest, on paper anyway, that Jack Burton is a silly character, is a stupid character, or is incompetent or anything like that. And there are moments in the film, of course, where he does show a sense of perhaps being a little bit, he might seem to be incompetent in certain instances. For instance, when they're at the Wing Kong Exchange and they've just they're battling a bunch of the Wing Kong guards there, and right, it's very famous when Wang is doing all the fighting, and it's the first time we see him doing full-fledged martial arts, and then he's just handling all these people on his own, while Jack is trying to help, tries to get his knife out of his boot, but then it slips out of his hand because he's all wet, and he has to run and get it, and he comes back, of course, and by the time he comes back with his it's all done. Time to go, right? So that is an example of what might seem to be Jack Burton's quote-unquote incompetence. But in actual fact, I think Jack Burton is very competent in many ways. It's just that this is a world that he doesn't fully understand, and it's a world that he's not necessarily an integral part of. I mean, he is in many ways a kind of outsider to this world of mystery and the supernatural in Chinatown, and all the myth and the mythology that it is involved there. So he's and it's what he says. I'm feeling a bit like an outsider here, and that's what he is. He is an outsider, and that, I think, might make him look, in one sense, to be somewhat out of his league, or beyond his depth, and perhaps even incompetent. But I would actually suggest the opposite, because he does show a lot of perseverance, and he also shows a lot of intelligence, especially under pressure. So, for instance, when Wang and Jack Burton are captured in the Wing Kong Exchange by thunder, they're captured. I'm sorry, I take that back. They're captured, and then they're taken to meet the old Lo Pan, and then they are taken to to this jail cell or something like that, and they're tied to the wheelchairs there. And after they're locked in, then it's Jack Burton who takes the initiative. It's not Wang, but Jack Burton. So he takes the initiative to wriggle himself out, throw himself down on the floor to cut himself loose from the straps, and to break free from this being tied up. And he helps Wang. So in that sense, he is being the proactive one in that sense. And even in that scene that I cited before about how the knife slipped out of his hand, I think that there's an innocence about that, and it's kind of understandable because after all, they were swimming before that, and so his hand would understandably be wet or moist, and so maybe he couldn't get a firm grip on the knife, etc. So that's very understandable, I think. And also, he does show initiative in terms of the way in which he handles Lo Pan, and the way he is ultimately, in the end, the one who is victorious over Lo Pan, right? Because after all, it's all in the reflexes. He's the one who kills Lo Pan off. And so I think there is a lot to be said about this. And he, how should I put it? It's like, well, to borrow a phrase from a different franchise of films altogether, but it's a film that I really enjoy, and it's not directly related to Big Trouble in Little China, but I think this phrase is quite apt. So to borrow a phrase from another film, there is an old Vulcan proverb: "Only Nixon could go to China," and I really think that this Vulcan proverb could be applicable to Jack Burton and Big Trouble in Little China, because he strikes this pose that seems to be so, how should I put it? People wouldn't necessarily expect him to be as effective as he ends up being, right? Because remember, for example, towards the end there, after the wedding, and Jack and Wang try to rescue Miao Yin, and right, she's still with Lo Pan and Thunder, and then they're about to confront the two of them, and Thunder intervenes and blocks them. And right, it's Jack first, and then Wang comes in later and does the little flip right through the hallway there and lands. So Wang is already well equipped, right? And then the two of them try to subdue Thunder, right? Well, who does Thunder go to and fight against, right? Wang gets in a little hit there against Thunder, and then Thunder just goes all berserk and goes after Wang and doesn't even bother with Jack Burton. So he leaves Lo Pan essentially alone with Jack Burton in the room. So that's an example of how Thunder, in that example, didn't necessarily think that Jack Burton was that big of a threat. Wang was a bigger threat to Thunder at that moment, which explains why he was devoting all of his attentions and anger towards Wang at the time. So that's a sense of letting one's guard down with respect to Jack Burton, because one doesn't expect him to be as effective as he ended up being. And in fact, in that moment, he left Lo Pan and Jack alone. And so there was that final confrontation between the two of them. And indeed, this is further indicated by Lo Pan himself in this very moment, because if you recall, Jack throws the knife and it misses, and it just hits the thing behind Lo Pan, and then Lo Pan picks up the knife and says, "Oh, it's a good knife." And then he just nonchalantly tries to throw it. He doesn't. He had the advantage, right? He could have very easily just taken the knife and really attacked Jack in a very aggressive way. But no, he was very nonchalant and just threw the knife back. It was almost as though Lo Pan at that moment maybe underestimated Jack to the point that he thought Jack was so weak that all he needed to do was flick the knife back. He didn't need to worry about doing any other kind of aggressive attack against Jack, which is probably suggestive also of Lo Pan underestimating Jack at that particular moment. And indeed, this is the great paradoxical strength of Jack Burton in this film. He seems, in the eyes of many in this film, to be incompetent, and perhaps from the viewpoint of many viewers, he might seem to be somewhat ineffectual. he tries, but he's really out of his depth. But there are these moments where, at the moment when he seems to be most, how to put it, no one expects anything from him. He just outshines the lack of expectation of people around him in a certain sense of that phrase. And so I think that is his real strength in this film. People underestimate him to their great risk, really, as Lo Pan and Thunder can account to. And so I think that's why he is very much, I think the phrase, the Vulcan proverb, only Nixon could go to China, I think is very apt in this instance. And of course, Jack Burton as a character, as Kurt Russell brings life to him, he has so many great lines of dialogue and so many great phrases, and he is so earnest too. There's a lovely sense of respect that he has for Wang and for this world, and there are moments when he might seem to be a little bit insensitive to the situation. For instance, when all the remaining surviving members of the Changsing and Egg come and meet at Egg's place. And he says, this looks like junk, and then Wang has to politely remind him, that maybe to Western eyes, but this is actually worth a fortune. And also, when they all meet at a rendezvous, and Jack is asking, does anyone of the Changsings, do they speak any English? And one of the Changsings, who's actually played by James Liu, I think, says, who is this guy? So it's obvious that they speak English. So Jack seems to be insensitive about these certain aspects of the culture. But he doesn't hold on to that kind of ignorance for very long. He's very much he knows and he appreciates his foibles and his failings, and I think that is also something that is very much endearing about him. And I think this is true in the way that he approaches the sort of Asian culture and the Asian American culture during these moments that are depicted in the film. And in other words, he might seem ignorant in some moments, but he always tries to remedy the situation, or he always tries to maintain an open mind, and he never talks down to anyone, or it's not like he is disrespecting anyone around him. It's just a case of him not really knowing what's going on. And to combine that also with his own character, the fact that he is also very self-effacing, that he knows his weaknesses. This is exemplified, of course, in that great moment at the end where he had a chance to hook up with Kim Cattrall character. And my goodness, it could have been anyone's fantasy to do that, but there was that moment when she really was into him. But he says, he really was very much knowing that his own character, his own personality, it wouldn't have worked out. I rub people the wrong way, and it never works out. And so that kind of moment makes him very self-effacing and quite genuine. And it's that sense of genuineness that is part of his character, together with his bravery, that it almost is to the level of real sheer, almost maybe, and I mean this in a very affectionate way, but maybe his bravery is he's either very, very brave, or just he has absolutely no idea how dangerous in fact the situation really is. And I think it's a little bit of both, perhaps. But combine that also with his eagerness to learn and his eagerness to help, and also the fact that he is very self-effacing and genuine, despite his other seeming failings, I think makes Jack Burton a genuine presence and a real character. Of course, he's got many catchphrases and many lines of dialogue that are just iconic, and that also helps. But as a human being character that is fleshed out by Kurt Russell's brilliant performance. I think there is something of a genuineness and earnestness about Jack Burton that makes him very lovable and makes us want to root for him, even though he might not necessarily be the hero of the film. And speaking of the hero of the film, of course, I think we have to mention Wang, Dennis Dunn, who is the hero of the film. And he is so because he is our guide through the film. He, along with other characters, though, of course, but he is one of the characters that teaches us about this world and what is going on. And he is telling us about the myth of Lo Pan, for instance. He is giving us more information about what the three storms are. He's giving us information about Mao Yin. He's giving us information about Egg. He's giving us information about little things in the Wing Kong Exchange, the hell of the upside down sinners, and the hell of boiling oil and all that. Well, actually, no, it just means keep out, but that sort of thing. And he is a sort of translator of this world and the language and the myth, not only to Jack Burton, but also to us, the viewers. And so he is in many ways a very integral part of this film. And in that mode, of course, he could be seen as a sidekick, but as we know in watching this film, he is elevated to hero status in many respects. He is the one who is very well versed in martial arts himself. He is the hero at the end in terms of his grand, magnificent sword battle with Rain at the final battle at Lo Pan's wedding. That is one of those great sequences in any John Carpenter film, that sword battle between Rain and Wang. And Rain thinks that he's got one over him, but along the way, he realizes that Wang is actually indeed a formidable adversary, to the point where Wang does the thing with his eyebrows like that, which is a moment that I absolutely love. And the music is just blaring at the time. That great chromatic John Carpenter, Alan Horth synthesizer score. It's really great. I think it's called The Great Arcade on the CD, on the soundtrack of the film Big Trouble in Little China. But yes, so the sword fight with Rain. And him leaping through the air and running up and down walls and doing all this thing. He's almost like he's got a little bit of magic in him as well. And so there is this a great development of this character all the way up to him becoming truly the hero for a good part of the film anyway. And which is just a brilliant thing. And what is so great about Wang, another great aspect about Wang, which makes this film really fantastic in my eyes, is he is all throughout, an American. He is an Asian American in this film, and that's just something I really want to bring up here, which is that this film also touches on the fact that this culture and these people are all Americans, and they are living in San Francisco, and it's this culture, but it's the Chinatown culture, but it's also the fact that they are American, and it's this status or this or this character or this aspect of their character, and how they relate to China, the culture of China, and also the culture of America, and it's this connection between these two by virtue of the fact that they are Asian Americans. I think is an aspect of this film that is very subtly but still very effectively touched on in many ways, and I think primarily through the characterization of Wang, Dennis Dunn's character. There's, of course, the great moment just before the final battle where they drink, it's time for the medicine, right, as Egg Shen puts it, and they have a toast Of course, Egg says cheers, right? But for Wang and for Jack Burton, it's a nice quiet moment where they can share a little great dialogue scene, right? Here's to the Army and Navy and the battles they have won, and to America's colors, colors that never run, and may the wings of liberty never lose a feather. And so, this is, I think, a very important aspect. Not only is it a great dialogue scene, but it's also emblematic of the fact that Wang is an American, and he is proud of that, and it gives him strength, it gives him solace to say these words, and I think that is something that is really quite a powerful thing. The same is very similar. I mean, we see this pop up in other places. You know, when Uncle Chu talks to Jack Burton early on in the film, talking about how the Wing Kong and the Changsing have been fighting for centuries, he says, "China is here, Mr. Burton." And also Egg Shen, right? Egg Shen at the end, when Jack Burton says, "Why don't you go on to China, visit the motherland?" And Egg Shen says, "China's in the heart, Jack, and wherever I go, she is with me." So these are, I think, really interesting plays on this theme that I was trying to bring up about this idea of Asian American identity in this film. And it also brings up the fact that, yes, these are Americans, and yet there's always this notion of China, or the image of China, or what China means to them, as being translated to their surroundings, where they find themselves now, which is America. And also we have Egg saying, right, China's in the heart, and wherever I go, she is with me. And it's interesting too that he says this in that moment, because Jack Burton's question might seem, in one sense, to be slightly insensitive, or maybe not such an appropriate question, in the sense, I mean, he said it very innocently, of course, but he asked in the sense that, why don't you go back to China, visit the motherland, But there is a sense where for the Asian American experience, I think for many could be such that, in fact, because they are indeed American, the motherland, so to speak, is America, right? And so I think what Egg said in response, I think, is so noble, and it's so indicative of how wonderful Egg Shen is as a character. And he says, it's in my heart, and wherever I go, she is with me. And that I think is such a deep moment when talking about Asian American identity, and how it's this idea of I can be here, and I can have the notion of where I came from, where the generations before me came from. I can have that still in my heart, and yet I can be an American. And I think that is part of what Egg is saying at that particular moment. It's all linked to how this identity is playing itself out in this film, Big Trouble in Little China, and linked all the way back, of course, to what I said at the start of this particular portion of this conversation, that being the character, the Dennis Dunn character in Wang. So I think that this film is so remarkably complex and very layered on this particular point alone, and it's played out through the characters. As we see, it's played out through Wang, which is a great character, another great character in a John Carpenter film. Also played out with Egg Shen, as I was trying to mention before, with these moments. And we're on the topic of Egg Shen. My goodness, this is Victor Wong. This is one of those performances for the ages. It fills in that role that we often see in these types of films. The older, wise master, and he has a stature which might seem on the surface, on the outside, to be somewhat unimpressive, or somewhat maybe strange. I mean, there's a great look when Egg emerges before the final battle, and he's got all this, there's a six demon bag, and he's got all this stuff, and his trousers are basically stuffed with stuff. I don't know what it is. He looks rather bumbling and foolish, and there's a look, especially Jack Burton gives. I said, okay, right, that sort of thing. So Egg looks, on the surface anyway, to be maybe somewhat bumbling, but in fact he is really quite the master, quite the magician, and it's of course shown in all of its glory in the final battle scene. Although there is a moment at the very start of the film where he's talking to I think it's a lawyer. I think it's credited on the credits as being Pinstripe Lawyer or something, but right, Egg is there sitting there, and he's saying, talking about what he calls Chinese black magic, and then he holds up his hands, and he has a little show of the magic that he has, and of course that was nothing. That's how it always begins, very small, and it's just a little bolt of electricity. Well, I always thought that was such an interesting moment, because if you remember, in the final battle at Lo Pan's wedding, we see him throw little bombs, and we see him. Of course, he has the medicine to give to all the guys before they go out, and of course, it makes them feel great. And Jack says, I feel kind of invincible. And of course, he also has a six demon bag, and he's got his little fan that he helps to deflect the lightning from lightning, and he's got his little thing where he does the proxy battle with the visions between his vision and Lo Pan's vision, and of course, right, you never could beat me, Shen. And what does he say? Peasant magic, and he's very demeaning towards Egg. But of course, this is suggestive that they have a history together, which is also very interesting. But the point that I wanted to bring up was that nowhere in this battle, as far as I can recall, do we ever see Egg actually show any use of electricity emanating from his body. We never see anything like that as far as I can tell. Maybe he did so and the camera was elsewhere, because we know that the fighting still happened, and he did do a lot of things while Jack and Wang were busy with Lo Pan and Thunder, etc. So remember, because the next time we see Egg, he's right, Mao Yin, after they've rescued Mao Yin and they're trying to escape, they say, they see up in the ceiling there, a hole in the ceiling. He says, there's Egg. He says, how'd you get up there? He says, wasn't easy. And which is a great bit of ellipsis, right? We'll never know how he ended up getting there, but he's Egg, so he always has a way, right? But we never see him show any bolts of energy or electricity from his hands or anything like that. We only saw it at the beginning, and I always thought that was really interesting, because the only other character that we see with electricity coming out of his hands, of course, is Lightning, one of the three storms, James Pax. And I love how John Carpenter and Kurt Russell talk about him in the commentary. I love how they say they're trying to remember his name, and they remember and they say James Pax, right? And there's a little look when when Lightning does his thing with the two blades, right? And then he has a little look on his face there, and he gives a little curl of his lip, and then I think it's Kurt Russell says, oh, there's a little bit of Elvis Pax. It's like he was giving a little look that reminded Kurt Russell of Elvis Presley. It's a great moment in the commentary. But James Pax is Lightning, of course. Lightning is the only other character that shows that is using sort of electricity and all this stuff like this, as far as I can tell. And of course, I love the little hand motions. He has to generate electricity. There's one in particular that I really like, is when he does the little thing like this, and he goes like this, and then like that to get the lightning to destroy the big mouth, and then will close down in order to protect Thunder and Lo Pan and Mao Yin, who are trying to escape. I mean, it's not really effective anyway, because Wang ends up being able to go through it, which is a very interesting detail. But I love that little bit when he does that with his hands like that. But he is the only character in the film, as far as I can tell, that uses lightning or electricity like this. So I always thought it was really curious. You know, does Egg's history with Lo Pan, does it run to the point that maybe Egg and Lightning have this kind of relationship? I mean, they both are lightning users. Was Egg somehow more deeply involved in this world that involved these magical beings who end up becoming these powerful people like the Storms? Does Egg have that history in him in the past? We never know. We don't know what the actual situation is between how the characters know each other. But all we know is that Egg Shen is known to these characters. They are afraid of him. We see, in fact, Thunder and Rain react in a very similar way when they realize that Egg Shen is on their tail. So there is a past between them, but we never get those details. But it's always interested me, right? Egg shows electricity powers the same way as Lightning does. So maybe there's a closer relationship there. I'm not sure. I'm speculating, of course. But this is a really superb performance. It's like a sort of he is the Obi-Wan Kenobi character in many ways, but he is also very funny, and he's very light on his feet, and he has a certain sense of charm and wittiness, and he also knows his place. I love the moment where in essence, he really saved the day for everyone. He was the one who helped everyone out. He helped them out when they were trying to escape during those final scenes when everything was just falling down in flames, and he was up there top, and he helped with the pulley. And he had all his little tricks in his 6-demon bag, and he knew what to do and where to go and exactly when at the right time. So he was the leader. He was the general of the final battle. So he really had a lot to do with this. And so in many respects, he should have been essentially like the VIP or the MVP, if you will, of the whole proceedings. But at the end, as soon as they escape in Jack Burton's truck, if you notice, when the light's red and the truck stops, and Miao Yin and Wang are kissing, and Gracie, the Kim Cattrall character, says, "Oh, look at that! Doesn't make you feel good?" And light screen, you can go now. And if you notice, Egg is sitting next to Kim Cattrall's character, but he's almost blocked by her. It's almost as though he is disappearing from the film, because he is no longer, his function has been fulfilled. His mission is over. And of course, after that, he promised himself a long vacation. It's time to collect, and so that's why he quietly leaves the restaurant at the very end. And I find that to be such a noble gesture that he has. He doesn't do it for the glory. He just does it because he knows that it's his duty, and he has fulfilled his duty to a great extent. What a great character Egg Shen is. Just one of a kind, fantastic. And let me also say that the character Gracie Law, and her presence and the way that Kim Cattrall breathes life into this character, as I was indicating before, she is a character that's almost right out of a Howard Hawks movie, and she is so energetic, and she's so keen on fighting for justice, and helping the young woman Tara at the airport, and also trying to help out Mao Yin and trying to figure out this story, and to be along for the ride, but also be part of the situation when it's discovered that she is also someone with green eyes. So her performance, I think, is another one of those just energetic, bubbly, full of life performances. And she has a charm and a wit and an intelligence, and she is also just filling the screen with a lightness and a real sense of beauty. which is so wonderful. And the chemistry between her and Jack Burton, Kurt Russell, I think is just so captivating and really something that we as audience members can really follow. And I love the back and forth between them. There's maybe a sense of initial attraction on Jack's part at first, and then she obviously doesn't really like him, or maybe is a little bit repulsed by him. Try standing where I am. It's Miller time, and those sorts of things. But then gradually, she realizes that maybe she is more into him than she first might have been at the start of the film. And so yes, and one of those moments that I really love is at the very end, and Margot says, "Well, aren't you going to even kiss her goodbye?" And he looks at her, and she looks back at him, and he says, "No." See you around, Burton. You never can tell. And I think that is such a telling moment. I always felt that, oh gosh, if I were in his shoes, I think I would have made a different choice. But yes, he said no, and that's another indication of his self-awareness. But also, it's just a lovely moment. That is in many ways more romantic than kissing. I mean, the fact that they didn't kiss is maybe more romantic than if they kissed at all. So that is what a great way to cap off that storyline between her and Jack Burton. What a great storyline. And also just she also shows initiative in the film. She is feisty where she needs to be. She shows fight right at the very end. She also shows her nerve when she fights back to the extent that she's able to at the wedding, and she takes the initiative with the spear and trying to think of a way of counterattack against Lo Pan. She even shows initiative to make Jack Burton look good right during that final fight, and she takes the time to stop Jack and go like this and rub the lipstick off of his mouth, which is again such a great moment. It's a little moment, but it's a comic moment, but it's just so great, and it's also a nice character moment. It shows Jack's sort of lack of awareness in a comic way, but it also shows Gracie and the fact that she'll just take a moment and just make sure that he doesn't look overly foolish. And I think that's such a really tender human moment in a still very comic, almost throwaway sort of moment. It's really great. And this, again, these little things add up to a great characterization for everyone concerned. But Kim Cattrall, my goodness, what a great performance she gives. And I should round out the performances by also mentioning, I can't mention everyone, I'd love to, but let me also mention James Hong, and James Hong, of course, as Lo Pan, one of those fantastic villains. The fact that he has a backstory that makes him almost sympathetic and vulnerable, and the fact that he is yearning for a kind of physicalness that'll give him some earthly satisfaction or earthly based satisfaction. It reminds me almost of the character of Dracula in Bram Stoker's Dracula. He's a villain in one sense of the word, but he's also a sympathetic character with a tragic past. And so I think that is a really nice touch that this characterization is. And James Hong gives such a great performance, and he's so suave and menacing as a sort of younger ghost specter of Lo Pan. But then he is also very menacing, but in a different way, a comic way, slightly off-putting way, but to great effect in the old age makeup. And you can see him, he's very physical in that, and he shakes the shakes the in his wheelchair, and he's got a manner in terms of how he speaks. He's almost not moving his lips, and yet he is just very menacing and chilling, and also comic and funny at the same time. That is such a great performance. And speaking of the villains, We have, of course, the three storms, which I really enjoy. I mentioned James Pax's lightning. He's probably the younger of the three. He is not as involved in a lot of the goings on among this group as some of the others, although he does have a role. It seems like he has a role in particular in terms of dealing with Miao Yin, and it's his electricity that, for whatever reason, turns Miao Yin and Gracie, turns their eyeballs white at one moment, and all that. So he does have a certain role, but it's also rain and thunder, right? And especially thunder seems to be kind of the leader of the group. Carter Wong, of course, he's just a towering presence, really unforgettable, iconic presence in this film. And I love how there's so much bluster and so much force of will in Thunder, and how Carter Wong plays it. But ultimately, it's that bluster and force of will that gets the better of Thunder in the end, right? Because he is so much about showing how tough he is. He's so much about yelling and screaming and really just being angry and just creating this sense of showing this sense of bluster. But it's almost to the point where it becomes too much, even for him, right? Because ultimately, in the end, he can't control it. And he's so passionate, and he's so into his role that he will just devote his all into every little thing that he does, whether it's trying to expand his chest by breaking free of the grip that Jack has on him and around the middle of the film, or even when he grabs the gun out of Jack's hand at the very end and he smashes it. Right? I love that moment when he takes the gun and just smashes it, and he has this great yell, and the gun turns to dust. And you look at his face, and when he's yelling, he's got this great angry yell, but it's almost like he's smiling at the same time. There's this wonderful way that Carter Wong, his face, it registers a kind of emotion, which is really lovely. And of course, it's marked too by the fact that the way that Thunder dies is it's not by anyone's doing, except it's just that he is so emotionally upset at what has happened to Lo Pan that he just can't control himself. He just explodes. My goodness, what an arc! What an arc! And Rain as well. Rain is he's got the long hair, which is such a lovely trait. It's the long hair, which is very suggestive of rain itself, the falling rain and water. So I love that image. Of course, it's also very suggestive of this kind of hairstyle that existed with certain characters in for instance, Hong Kong martial arts films, and so that is another great callback. But Rain too is a character that has a certain coolness about him. He has a coolness and calm, but that it erupts oftentimes to the point where he has a danger and sinister quality, a quiet, sinister danger to him, and which is even made even more dangerous by the fact that he's very physical and graceful in his movements. And we see that all throughout the film, almost ballet, dance-like. Right, the actor who plays him, right, Peter Kwong, he was trained as a dancer, and so this is seen quite. He has a lot of grace, and this is also played out in the sword fight at the end between him and Wang, of course. And again, what a great sword fight that is! And I love the way in which he uses those Nerf balls and goes like that. And then he uses them to attack Jack Burton. And I love the little detail where you just see all the little Nerf balls on the ground there. So it's obvious that Jack Burton has been hit by a number of them in the Wing Kong exchange. And I also love when he's on the phone and he hears Jack's, where are we? And he just says, "You are nowhere." And just does that look, and he just nods his head and leaves the two of them to talk with the elderly Lo Pan at that moment in the film. I just love Rain. What a great character, and again, a lovely contrast with Thunder, and also by extension with Lightning. So What a great performance, great cast of characters. Of course, that's not all, but as far as the core characters are concerned, just fantastic bunch. Really worthwhile here. And gosh, I suppose I could go on and on and on, but I think I should try to wrap this up as quickly as I can. So let me say that this is a film that I think, in conclusion, I think is very significant in the context of John Carpenter's career. I think it also plays very nicely in quite nuanced and complex way this notion of Asian American identity in ways that I think the more I think about it, the more profound I realize that it is. And also, it's talking about it's essentially a grand entertainment of many genres and many styles, with beautifully drawn out or drawn up characters at the core of this film. And at the center of that, of course, is the one and only, the great Jack Burton. Right? Who? Jack Burton, me. And that's what he says. Like, oh gosh, what a great movie. Jack Burton, one of the great characters of the ages, cinema, right? Just one of a kind, fantastic film. So this is, in a nutshell, Big Trouble in Little China. And so I'm sorry for going on like this. I hope you can forgive me, but really I could just go on and on and on. In fact, I did talk about this film early on when I was just starting this YouTube channel in a very haphazard discussion, not unlike the discussion that I just had. So I apologize for my continued sense of lack of organization, but I hope you can forgive me, because I really do have such a great affinity and affection for this film, and I always will. And it will never tire and never grow old for me. It'll always stay fresh and stay beautiful and potent and entertaining, and just a thrilling piece of entertainment from start to finish. So, my friends, I am so sorry, but I hope you can forgive me for my rambling on like this, but perhaps you might forgive me, and so if so, then I would be really appreciative of that, because right after all, we really shook the pillars of heaven, didn't we, Wang? So, my friends, thank you very much, and what do you think about this film? If you have any thoughts or comments, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'd very much love to hear what it is you have to say. So, my friends, that's it for now, and until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great films. And until we meet again, thank you and cheers.